$5. 1 foot long. You heard that jingle so many times it became part of your brain's furniture. You probably just sang it. Right now. In your head. That is not an accident. The $5 footlong was one of the most successful promotional campaigns in fast food history. Launched in 2008. Went national within months. Pulled Subway out of a sales slump. Generated billions in additional revenue. Became a cultural reference that outlasted the promotion itself by more than a decade. And it was not Subway's idea. It was a franchise owner's idea. One location. Stuart Frankel. Miami, Florida. 2004. He needed to move inventory on slow weekends. He priced a footlong at $5 and put a sign in his window. That's the origin story. Here is the part that matters. When Subway rolled out the $5 footlong nationally in 2008, the economics of that price point were not what they appeared. The bread had been quietly reformulated. The portion sizes had been quietly adjusted. The definition of what counted as a footlong had become, let's say, flexible. And the franchise owners who were required to honor the $5 price point in markets where ingredient costs made that number unprofitable? They absorbed the loss. Subway collected the brand equity. The franchisees paid for the promotion. This is not a sandwich story. This is a story about how a global fast food corporation used one franchise owner's desperation pricing experiment to build the most recognized value proposition in fast food, and then engineered the product itself to make that promise financially survivable for the corporation while distributing the financial pain to the people who actually made the sandwiches. Fred DeLuca was 17 years old when he opened the first Subway in 1965. Bridgeport, Connecticut. The goal was to earn money for college. His family friend Peter Buck lent him $1,000. They opened a submarine sandwich shop. The original premise was simple. Fresh bread. Assembled to order. Presented as a healthier alternative to the burger chains that were dominating American fast food in the 1960s. Subway's growth was driven almost entirely by franchising, not by corporate-owned locations. The franchise model was Subway's fundamental business architecture, and understanding it is essential to understanding how the $5 footlong worked and who actually paid for it. In a franchise model, the franchisor, Subway, licenses the brand, the system, and the product specifications to independent operators, franchisees, who pay a franchise fee, ongoing royalties, and are required to purchase ingredients through Subway-approved suppliers. The franchisee owns the physical location, employs the staff, and bears the operational costs. The franchisor collects royalties on gross sales and controls the brand. This structure creates a specific misalignment of incentives. The franchisor's revenue is a percentage of gross sales. More sales equals more royalty revenue for the franchisor, regardless of whether those sales are profitable for the franchisee. A promotion that drives high sales volume at a low price point can increase franchisor revenue while simultaneously destroying franchisee profit margin. The $5 footlong was a masterclass demonstration of this misalignment in action. Before we get to the promotion, we need to talk about the bread. Because the bread is the product. And the bread changed. Subway's bread is its primary differentiator. The fresh bake sub roll. The smell of bread that hits you when you walk in the door. The implicit promise of a restaurant that bakes its own product daily. Here is the chemistry. Subway sub roll is a yeasted, enriched dough, flour, water, yeast, sugar, salt, and various conditioners. The specific formulation has changed over the decades. The changes were made for commercial reasons, not culinary ones. The most commercially significant change involved dough conditioners, specifically azodicarbonamide and various oxidizing agents, that improve dough strength, increase volume, and reduce mixing time. These conditioners allow a dough to rise faster, bake at higher throughput, and produce a lighter, airier texture that looks like more bread than it is. Volume without density. The bread appears substantial. The actual mass of flour in that loaf is lower than it would be in a traditionally fermented, longer-proofed bread. This matters because the footlong measurement became a flashpoint in 2013, when an Australian teenager posted a photograph of his Subway footlong measured against a tape measure showing 11 inches, not 12. The image went viral. Class action lawsuits followed. Subway's response was telling. They argued that footlong was a brand name, not a measurement guarantee. That bread length was subject to natural variation due to yeast activity and baking conditions. The class action was settled. Subway agreed to use measuring tools to ensure consistent length. The bread that defined the product was simultaneously the brand promise and the vulnerability, a physical artifact whose dimensions were less consistent than the marketing claimed. The sandwich is bread and filling. The filling is the value proposition. And the filling has its own engineering history. Subway's protein offerings, the turkey, the chicken, the tuna, the steak, are not equivalent to the proteins you buy at a butcher or prepare at home. They are processed products manufactured to Subway specifications by approved suppliers and distributed centrally. The chicken is perhaps the most documented case. In 2017, a CBC Marketplace investigation in Canada sent Subway chicken samples to a food testing lab at Trent University. The results indicated that the chicken breast strips contained approximately 50% chicken DNA, with the remainder being primarily soy protein. Subway disputed the methodology. The lab stood behind its results. A second test was ordered. The dispute was not definitively resolved, but the fundamental question it raised, what is the actual protein content and composition of fast food chicken relative to what consumers assume, was legitimate and remained unanswered to most consumer satisfaction. The tuna question emerged in a separate legal challenge. In 2021, a lawsuit filed in California alleged that Subway's tuna product contained little or no actual tuna. Testing commissioned by the New York Times found no detectable tuna DNA in samples, though the Times noted this could reflect the degradation of DNA in cooked or heavily processed fish rather than the absence of tuna. Subway denied the allegations. These disputes point to a consistent structural question about Subway's protein offerings. The products are priced and positioned as straightforward animal proteins. The actual composition and sourcing are complex, processed, and, in several documented instances, significantly different from consumer expectations. The $5 footlong made the protein perception question even more acute. At $5 for a 12-inch sandwich, the math of actual protein content per serving becomes extremely constrained. Either the protein is of lower cost than assumed, or the quantity is lower than the visual presentation suggests, or both. The global financial crisis. Consumer spending is contracting. Fast casual restaurants are competing aggressively on value. Subway sales, which had been strong in the mid-2000s, are under pressure. Stuart Frankel's $5 footlong experiment, originally run in his Miami location in 2004, had been noted internally by Subway's corporate team. In early 2008, corporate decided to roll it out nationally. The campaign launched with the jingle, $5 footlong, written for a local television commercial. So aggressively earwormy that it spread nationally through radio and television advertising within weeks. The consumer response was extraordinary. Subway's same-store sales increased 14% in the year of the campaign's national rollout. For a chain with nearly 30,000 locations, that represented billions of additional dollars in gross revenue. Subway's royalty revenue, calculated as a percentage of gross sales, increased proportionally. Corporate was thriving. Franchise operators were not. In markets where ingredient costs were high, urban locations, high minimum wage jurisdictions, areas with elevated real estate costs, selling a footlong at $5 was frequently unprofitable. The price point had been set by corporate. Franchisees had no meaningful ability to deviate from it while operating under the Subway brand. They were required to honor the promotion. The franchise business consultant system, Subway's internal oversight structure, monitored compliance. Franchisees who didn't honor the price faced consequences from their franchise agreements. The result was a transfer of promotional cost from the franchisor to the franchisee. Corporate collected the royalty on gross sales. Franchisees absorbed the margin compression on the individual transaction. In 2020, the Irish Supreme Court ruled that Subway's bread did not qualify as bread under Irish tax law because its sugar content was too high. Irish value-added tax, VAT, law exempts certain staple foods, including bread, from taxation. For bread to qualify for the exemption, sugar content cannot exceed 2% of the weight of flour in the dough. Subway's bread was found to contain sugar at approximately 10% of flour weight, 5 times the legal threshold for bread classification. Under Irish law, Subway bread was legally closer to cake than to bread. This ruling was not a cosmetic concern. It had tax implications for Subway's Irish operations. But its more significant consequence was the public revelation of Subway's actual bread formulation. The 10% sugar content is not accidental. Sugar in bread dough performs multiple functions beyond sweetness. It feeds yeast, accelerating fermentation and rise time. It contributes to Maillard browning during baking, producing the golden color and aroma that signals fresh-baked quality. And it acts as a humectant, retaining moisture in the crumb and extending the perception of freshness beyond what an unsweetened bread would maintain at the same moisture content. The formulation is engineered for throughput, appearance, and shelf perception, not for nutritional profile or traditional bread chemistry. The $5 footlong was built on this bread. The value proposition that drove billions in sales was built on a product that, in at least one jurisdiction, the courts determined was not legally bred. The $5 footlong ran in various forms from 2008 into the early 2010s. By 2012, franchisee pressure had driven Subway to limit the promotion scope. Rising food costs, rising minimum wages, and the fundamental math of below-margin pricing had made the flat $5 price point unsustainable for operators in many markets. Subway attempted to retire the promotion. Franchisees in some markets refused, worried about competitive disadvantage. Corporate attempted to formalize a new pricing structure. The tension between corporate's brand interest in maintaining the value narrative and franchisees' economic interest in profitable transactions became increasingly visible. By 2014, the $5 footlong was effectively dead as a national promotion. Subway attempted to revive it in 2017 at a modified price with restrictions. Franchisee organizations actively opposed the revival, arguing publicly that the economics were impossible. Some franchise owners stated openly in trade press that the promotion had driven some operators out of business. The jingle that had become one of the most recognized advertising phrases in American fast food history had created a brand promise that the economic reality of the product could not sustain indefinitely. The $5 footlong is now a nostalgia reference. The current price of a footlong at Subway, depending on location and product, ranges from $8 to $12 or more. The gap between the promotional price and the current reality is not inflation alone. It is the correction of a price point that was never economically sound for the people who actually made the sandwiches. The $5 footlong is remembered as one of the great fast food marketing victories of the 21st century. And in narrow corporate terms, it was. It drove Subway to become, briefly, the largest fast food chain in the world by location count. It created a brand association between Subway and value that persists today despite the price point being long gone. But the engineering behind it was not marketing alone. The bread that made the footlong visually impressive was formulated with dough conditioners and elevated sugar content that maximized volume, minimized cost, and, as the Irish Supreme Court found, may not qualify as bread under certain legal definitions. The protein fillings were processed industrial products whose actual composition was, in several documented cases, significantly different from what the visual presentation implied. The price point that drove sales was financially unsustainable for the franchise operators who bore the cost of it, while corporate collected royalty revenue on gross sales regardless of franchisee profit. The $5 footlong was a product. It was also a promise. And the gap between what the promise implied and what the engineering delivered is the defining story of Subway's most successful decade. Stuart Frankel put a sign in his Miami window in 2004. He was trying to sell sandwiches on slow weekends. What Subway built on top of that sign was something else entirely. A brand identity. A franchise squeeze. A bread formulation that raised questions about what bread is. A protein supply chain that raised questions about what chicken is. And a jingle that bypassed critical thinking so completely that you probably heard it in your head the moment this video began. The food on your tray at Subway is real. The hunger it satisfies is real. The $5 you paid for it, if you were buying in 2008, was the price of an illusion that the corporation couldn't afford to maintain and the franchisees couldn't afford to honor. And yet you remember it fondly. That is the most impressive thing Subway ever engineered. Not the bread. Not the chicken. The nostalgia. Let us know in the comments what we should cover next. Thanks for watching.